So good afternoon everybody, and welcome back to day 27 of 100 days of code. We're going to continue on and keep on coding, so thank you for joining me. Just got my earphones in here, forgot that. Although it's all good. Just sitting down now, Sunday afternoon. Lovely. So yes, had quite a nice morning and ready to study. So what we were doing yesterday was we had just extracted out this information into our input component here. So now we just need to worry about the props. I had wondered why I wasn't getting syntax highlighting, that in fact we shouldn't be able to find these things, but regardless of whether the IDE is going to tell us that we are in fact not passing through this stuff, we are not passing it through, because we just haven't passed that information in yet. So we need to take care of these things that we're calling out and trying to use within this component that we've extracted into our own input.js from the login. So we just need to actually pass this data through so we can use it in here. So far we've just pulled out some of the React, the JS code, and also extracted out the CSS. So we're going to continue on. I'll just close everything else. Close others so we can focus here. Okay, so the way we'll do this now is like we're passing through our props. So rather than getting it from the email reduce state, we're going to get this is valid directly from the props. So we can just do props.isValid, and that makes sense because we will be passing in that information from the props. We'll make sure that that happens so we can check if it's is valid from the props, not from the reducer, because we don't have that reducer function in here anymore. So that's going to be a very similar approach to pretty much everything here. So our label, we're going to get out all of our information from the props, we're going to pass it in. So rather than adding email here, we want this to be a reusable input that we can use for all of our inputs. So it's not just going to be email that we use this for. So we'll instead pass in the label from outside in order to keep this reusable. So I'll just copy this, and then that's the same for the label, because, or the HTML4, so we know what this is pointing at. This too needs to come in from the props, like so. So this will be props.id, and then we also are going to do the same for these down here. So this is just making this a reusable component, and this information that's going into the input, we are going to pass it in from outside. So that's what we're doing here. This is going to be props.id, this will be props.type, and we're just going to pass all this information in whenever we use this particular component or our input, our new created input component. So I'll show you how this is going to actually work now in uno momento, but for the moment we're just setting this up, props.onblur, cool. And now we're going to actually use this in our login component where we originally extracted out this code. So yeah, so this is where we had our input originally. It was just here we had that JSX code that we've now extracted into this input. So we just literally copied over that same information that was here in this longhand format. So we've now extracted it out, separation of concerns, and that's looking a bit dodgy. So I'll just clean this up here. Yep. Well, what we could even do is like this, just so we can see. Oh no, that's all one line. Okay. Yeah, so we can't actually put this down on other lines. Well, it's just better if we leave it like that. And then we've our label and our input, and all these are at the same level. So we took this from our login component, and then just rather than using the data as we were previously using it to insert into these fields, which was coming from a different component, now we're just getting all of that information passed in from props. So now we will actually implement this by using the input that we just created, and that's after auto inserting it. So let's just have a look. Input from UI, input, which is perfect. So we've got UI, input and input, so it's got that exact component for us automatically. And if not, you can just import it yourself, you know. You do need the import for this to work. And then we'll pass in the various props that we're after naming. So we just pass these in, and then it'll know what to put into those areas again. Oh sheesh, what's up with my fingers? Oh. Oh, wasn't quite my fingers, I was hitting the wrong key, but that's okay. So yeah, so we're going to just pass in the ID is going to be email, because this is going to be the email. Then we have our label, which is email as well, but just slightly worded slightly differently. So, and why doesn't that just give me 2 brackets? So I'm going to just add an extension that when I add 1, then that always annoys me. Who knows? Anyway, so then it's very I'm just looking at minor things here. I'll show you now what I mean. So on the next one, so label, email, and then we have type, and this is going to be email as well. So on my work computer, whenever I type in one, either single or double quote, it just automatically adds the other one. And then a lot of the time I find that annoying, because then you have to like tab or like do arrow past the second one in order to continue on typing, because if you just hit carriage return or whatever, well, you're in the wrong place if it's done this for you. But I guess just the difference, you know, whichever approach I want, I should keep it the same on both my work and home computer. So therefore, you know, I just know what to expect, and my brain isn't sort of going, huh, why didn't I get the other double quote, you know. But it's just a small thing. I just thought I'd explain what on earth I was thinking there. So that's what I was thinking. So now here we can see we have our email input, which has gone in lovely there. There's our email input, and something's gone on with the password one, but that's okay. We're going to change this to use the same input reusable component. So for the moment I won't worry about what's gone wrong with the password. And we also just want to pass in the is valid prop, and then our value, our initial value. So email state dot value, email state dot value. Sometimes you just gotta sing, you know. And then we have our on change and our on blur. So these are all the things that we're expecting to be passed in with our props, and then this is how you use them then, you know. So just for actually ease of reading, now I will put these below. So we'll just do this just so you can see all of these things that are there. So we have our ID, we have our label, we have our type is valid, which is just coming from the email is valid, and this is coming from here. So our reduce state, so this is our use reducer, which is tracking the state of the is valid prop, and that is named, if it's valid, it's named email is valid is the name of the thing that we're tracking the is valid state on, so which is done through our use reducer. So this is just the thing that's either true or false to tell us whether or not our form is valid. So that's why we've put that into our is valid within our input declaration down below. When we're using this component within our JSX, we have our initial value, so you can just give it an initial value, and this is coming from our email state.value, which is just the particular value when we type something into that box, or empty, or when we update it, the value that's been updated. And then we have our onChange and our onBlur functions, which are tracking the onChange, and so whether or not the box changes, and then whether or not someone like puts their mouse in the box. So that's what's going on there. So onChange and onBlur, and we're passing all of these things in apart from value and is valid, because those two things are already included. But these things, ID, label, type, is valid as well, onChange, onBlur, and value. Like, we're expecting all these things because over here this is what it is looking for. So here we have props.is valid, so we want the props to contain this is valid thing because we're trying to do something with it in this. So we have to pass it through, and when we actually say we're going to use the input component, we're expecting these things to come through in our props, because then within our input component we are trying to access these things with the props, so they need to be passed through in the props, you know. And these are just the props. The props is just the things that you have passed information through on, you know. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope that you can see what I'm doing here. So we'll just continue on. So I want the onChange function to be the email change handler, yes, and I want the onBlur to be the validate. So we just check if it's actually valid once we put our mouse in there. So onBlur is going to be validate email handler, yep. Okay, so I'll just reload the page because you never know. No thanks. And we're getting given out to by the compiler. No, that's oh, don't mind my singing. So, cannot read properties undefined of reading value. Okay, so there's something up with our value, and what I think is wrong is this is our set state, and what we actually want is, so we had set up a set state, and then we also have this email reduced state. So we need our email reduced state because the reduced state is what contains the value and the is valid. And we came across this same problem in a previous video because we switched approaches, and during that, so we were first using set use state, which is all well and good, but we were tracking the email state and the email validation in separate states, and then the password state and the password validation in separate states as well. And a better approach for this will be to use the reducer and track all email related states together and all password related states together, so you have that information always in the right configuration at the time of trying to perform a function or run some function on it. You know that that is the actual state, whereas set states that are just tracking one thing and then trying to interplay with them, you can't really be sure that it's got the exact right state at that exact time in the way that we were trying to use it previously. Whereas when you do it with the use reducer, you're coupling them together, they're tightly linked, and they will be the right snapshot at the right time because you've explicitly linked them, and because use reducer gives you back this state that definitely the last state you went to look at, it's the last state. Do you know, it can't be one or two iterations behind, because that's part of use reducer, that it gives you the previous state, and the previous state is definitely the last updated state. Whereas just the way we were using set state, it may not have been truly reflective. So I don't want this email S state from using it in the use state approach. We want it from the use reducer approach, because we've changed approaches. This approach was better for what we were trying to do. So this is actually the name of the use reducer, the state tracking object that we actually want to use down below. So that should be used instead of what we were using. So because the email S state does not have a value as well, so that was just a long-winded way, but the main reason is the email state is just a variable that's tracking the state of the email, whereas the email reduce state is doing the same thing, but you can sort of pass it a bit more information. So here the email reduce state is tracking a value and the is valid properties. It has two properties on this object and we're tracking both of them. So the email state doesn't have a value, whereas the email reduce state does have a value, and I just gave you the reasons as to why we switched to the email reduce state. So this is actually the thing we want, and now we use this down below, and that should solve some of these errors, and then we'll still see if we get anything else wrong. Okay, so let's just save again, and I'll reload just to be sure. Okay, cool, and there you go. We didn't even have a error now. So now let's just have another look here, line 32, and check out some of these warnings. So it's saying that email state and password state is declared but never used. So I'm just going to comment those out for a moment and save. And that should get rid of some of those errors, warnings. And then we have one more on line 57, which is that, okay, yeah, so we're just missing some dependencies. React hook use effect has missing dependencies. Email reduce state is valid and password reduce state. Either include them or remove the dependency array React hooks. So we literally are we're using this email reduce state and password reduce state within this use effect. So we just need to pass them into this dependencies array to say, like, we are dependent on these things within this particular use effect function or hook, because that's how this use effect hook works. You pass in an array of anything that you're dependent on within the use effect. So that's the setup of the use effect. So seeing as we're using these, we need to pass them in to say we are dependent on these within this use effect function. So we'll do that, and that warning should now go away. So we are dependent on the use email reduce state, and we're also dependent on the pass reduce state. And then if we save and reload, it's just so great to see things working, you know, especially doing this live and just thinking, you know, great. It's just good when it works and I'm not like going down rabbit holes or things aren't working, and you know, can just remain calm and code. Remain calm always and code. It's the best way to code. So now we will just commit our message, and my messages, because I've just have got to a point now where I have implemented a component, the input component. My hands just feel a little dry actually. When we have inputted the input component, we have created our own input component, which is an input, you know, that's just like the password input box there. We've created our own input box, which allows us to dynamically change the name of the input box, the ID of the input box, and just extracts out that input, you know, the block of input code where you're defining an input in the login perhaps, to a better, more readable and you know, separation of concerns into its own component. So here we can see, look, this is the input component that's doing the input for the email, and look at how clean that is. You know, we just have our own component created called input, and we're passing in all this information as props, and this is a reusable component because we've passed it in and set it up to use these props. Whereas this down here is the password input, which is, you know, a bit more awkward. We have our div, and then we've got our classes here, and then we have to have our label, and you know, you have your label there, that's the label that's going to show here, this is the actual label, and then you have your input box, and you know, it's just a bit more messy, you know, you can see that it is really, and this is just a bit of a cleaner approach. It's just, you know, so if we got rid of all of this and we just replaced it like this for our password, which we're going to do now in a moment. It's just cleaner, you can immediately see what's going on, and it's just a bit easier to read. So we have now done that for our email. We've created this reusable component, so I'm going to commit, which I already started doing, and then I started waffling on. So we'll just say created. So waffling is just chatting your arse off in Ireland when you just are chatting. So I'm a bit of a chatter. Oh, sure, aren't we all here to have a chat as well, hopefully. So created a reusable input box. Input component, React component. That's grand, that'll do. Git push, cool. Let's move on. So we're going to do the same thing for password, and what we're going to do now is literally just remove this code as I suggested. Well, I'll leave that there for a moment just so we can see the name of these handlers and stuff that we want to pass in. So I'll get rid of all that, and I'm going to add another input here, input, and then we just want to set it up the same way for our password. So we're going to have our ID, and this is going to be password. I really need to change the location of my @ and my double quotes on this computer. Password, and then we have label, and this is the actual label that's coming out. So rather than being lowercase like you would want an ID to be, or how we have configured our IDs, you know, however you want your IDs, you just have a convention. So our IDs are lowercase, which will be a general convention anyway, that's going with coding, you know, general conventions. But our label is the label that we're going to see on our page. That's why this is capitalized. And then we have our type, which is going to be text, like text I presume. Let's just check. Okay, so type is just the thing we've created here, because our input box should be of type text. So I'm going to just do text and see what Max says, because I'm just going ahead here. Is valid is equal to, and now we want to pass in our actual sort of live code instead of just a string. So we're going to have pass is valid, or password is valid, we've named it, so cool. Then we want our value, which is coming from our password state, and again we want this to be live code, not static string. I'm not sure of the exact terminology for that, but hopefully that makes sense. When you have it in the double quotes like this, it's just a string that you're passing in. But whereas when you have it like this, it's doing something a bit more complex. We want to pass in a variable or a constant, or, you know, let const that tag name, and then it will extract the value from that. So that's what these curly brackets do. So then we have our value, and this is going to be our password use state. And dot value. So we want to get the value out of that. And then we have our onChange and onBlur methods that we're passing in, our you know, functions. So this is going to be our pass change handler, password change handler, and onBlur we want our validate. Dun dun dun. We want our validate password handler. Coolaboola. And then we just self-close this off, because you can self-close these tags, and save. And now we just have a surplus div, because I didn't properly get rid of that. And we can also just get rid of this input, because we've now done it with our own input component. So that does look a lot cleaner, you know, it's just easier to read. So that's great. And it's also done the automatic CSS for us, because we have wrote associated CSS, and that's why that password went all weird previously, and it looked off because we extracted out the CSS. So the CSS was no longer in here doing anything with the input box. We moved it over here, so that's why that password input was actually looking weird previously. I hadn't put two and two together. I was just like, oh, that looks weird. Oh well, you know, we'll just continue because I knew we were going to change it, but it's because we took out the CSS. So let's just, so yeah, so we have everything correct there. So type, we've just given type is our own type. It's our own prop that we've called type. So this should be password as well. Password, because there is no such thing as a password type as far as I'm concerned. So this is just another prop that we've named, and we want to pass in some information, and we want to, whatever we pass in, it's going to be associated to the type of prop. So that's what we've done there. So just still watching, seeing what Max is saying. Awesome. So now we're going to learn about a new hook, which is super duper. I learn so much when I'm with Max. Da-na-na. Yeah, he's great. And I hope you are learning so much when you're with me. That would be so great. Oh my god. That's the whole point, you know. So yeah, I know I'm learning a lot anyway, so definitely I can't see how yous aren't if I'm just like communicating what's going on in my brain. I'm learning a lot, so I'm learning a lot. Cool. So now what we're going to do is learn about a new hook and just finish off what we're doing with this particular component as well. Excusez-moi. So, same situation. I have my microphone clipped onto me, but I didn't bloody plug the thing in. And if I plug it in now, I just realised, I just noticed this on my desk, and I was like, Leanne, Lily, what have you done? What have you done? So, dun dun dun. I don't want to plug it in because then it's just going to be completely different sound halfway through the video. So we will just continue. Ah, look, sure, turn down your volume now, and the sound is going to get better quality. So, you know, I should plug it in actually. How do I just, anyway. Doesn't matter, keep learning. Okay, so first of all what we're going to do is remove this disabled prop from the button. So we're going to do this in a slightly different way. So we'll just remove that for the time being and continue. And then how we're going to check if this is disabled instead is up in our submit handler. We are going to, so I don't need this console log anymore. I wanted to show you what the event looked like. So yeah, let's check it out. So this is an event, right guys? I mentioned this in my last video. So once we click that button, here you can see what an event is like, right? So you have like all information about the event. So I should have actually like typed in some information, because then you can actually see the value of the event as well, which is the bit that you're generally most interested in, but there's loads of things in here that you can use. So event.target.value. So here's the target, and here we can access the value value. So we just need to keep on going because we're not at B yet. So where's value? Like it's definitely here because we use it, you know. I know it's here anyway. Event.target.value, so it should be my email address. Aha, so we've passed in two different things here, so actually now it's in V. There we go. So you have your actual text that you typed in when you have the event, so it passes through. In the case of this event, you know, we are capturing the event is capturing key presses. That's what this event is doing. So we can actually extract out that value and use this then, you know, so it's very useful. And there's other things, loads of other things going on in here as well. So, you know, you can check if on pointer leave, so when your mouse is moved away from the box. There's loads of different things you can do in here. On mouse over, when your mouse goes over it. On mouse leave, when your mouse leaves. So loads of different things. On input, on invalid, check if it's invalid. On key down, on key press. So these are all of the different events that you can be tracking, you know. So you can check if your event on key down, what happened when you pressed down the key on that event, when that event fired. So there's just loads of different things in here, and really it's the value that I'm normally concerned about, but there's loads of other things in here, and you can use them as you go through and learn about them. You know, if you're following a tutorial and it's using the value, well then you've got a bit of an idea how to use the value. Autofocus, that's another one that you'll use. So there's loads of things in here, but this is an event being console logged out to the console, and as you can see, you can extract the value from that event and do a whole load of other things. So very, very, very useful. So now I'm going to just get rid of this console log that I've just wanted to show you quickly what that was about, and then in here we can check for the form validity. So we're going to add an if statement saying form is valid. If form is valid, and open up our curly parens, and what we want to do is set the auth context to on login and pass through. So once it's valid, log in with that particular information, you know. So email state, email reduce state dot value, and the password reduce state dot value. Pass reduce state dot value. So these are just the reducers that are tracking the state of the email and the password, and then dot value is the actual value, like what I just showed you in the console. Although I was getting it from a different place there, I was getting it from the event. So it's within the event, and it's also, we've passed that information into our email reduce state because we've set up the code like that. So that's what's going on there. And then else, we want to add an else statement. So if the form is not valid, then do something else. Cool. Okay, so we're going to have an else if here actually. And we want to check if email is not valid. If email is not valid, so this exclamation is just saying if it's not valid, and we're going to focus. So if it's not valid, if our form is not valid, we want to bring the cursor back up here so they can type in their email, you know. So in order to do this, where did my, okay. So in order to do this, what we want to do is, say if I click login and the email is not valid, we want to just bring the cursor back up here into this box so they can start typing their email. That's what we're going to do. And in order to do this, we need to use another state, and the state for that is the use ref state. So let's implement that now. So use ref, and then within our input, within our component, because we found out yesterday that with any React hooks, they must be used within the actual component declaration. So underneath this thing, like the input, this is the input component declaration. You must use hooks within here, and you also cannot have them embedded within functions. It must be a standalone function. So that's what we're going to use ref now at the root level of within the component declaration. So we are going to call this input ref, and this is just going to use ref the same way we declare use state, similar to this, although use state takes in two items, not one. And then we also want to use effect, which we're going to have to declare up above also. Okay, that's cool, that's cool. And it did not import it, so we will just add that to this up here, because it also comes from React. So cool. And I quite like that because it was in a better place for me to see it. So let's continue. Okay. So okay, cool. So then we can include ref on this input when we use it down below in our JSX. So ref is just like included on these in React, so we can just use that inbuilt ref, and this is going to be pointing to input ref, and then in our use effect we can tell it how to use this effect. So input ref, and we want to get the current one and focus it, so that's all. And that's gonna run its own function then, and then we can just get rid of this stuff, so I don't need the return statement. We just want it like this. Nice and simple use effect. Use ref is not defined. Oh, did I accidentally delete the top row? Let's just do that again. So import React from import React, okay, from React, and then we just want to add use effect and use ref. I'm not sure how I got rid of that line, but oh well, all good, all good. So we'll just save that, and now okay, so what are my errors saying? Okay, cool, so they went away, so that's okay. So input ref current dot focus, so this is just focusing on the current one, which is why I focused on the password. So we'll just tweak this behavior, because that's not exactly what we want right now. So rather than doing it using use effect where we do the current, we're going to write our own method that's going to control the behavior of this. So we have a const, we can call it activate, and this will be a activate. Cool. It's going to be a function, an arrow function. And we'll do that same thing that we were doing in here. Okay. Right, so now in our login component, we want to use ref in here as well. So what is that extension? Because I don't like it. Because every time I go to just type something, it's auto-completing and adding in the function. And you know what? I'd prefer to practice writing the functions myself rather than just having it auto-complete for me and annoying me. So let's take that out. Simple extensions for React, JavaScript snippets. Yeah. Oh no, this isn't too bad. Well, no, this is probably doing some of it, yeah. Although they look more abbreviated, and I haven't been using the abbreviations. So this is actually okay. That's sort of how you'd like to do it, with an individual keyword. Well, me anyway. So I'll leave that one. I'm not sure if that's the one causing the issue. So let me just still look through. Okay, so this could be it. Could be either of these really. So I'm going to just uninstall this and see if that's okay. Styled components. Don't want the snippets. Okay. So I think hopefully and if not, I'll just come back and remove this one, but this looks like it's using more unique keywords, because every time I like go to type something, it's auto completing the rest, and that's coming from an extension I've installed, which seemed like a good idea, but it's actually frustrating me. So I'll just take it out and see now if I type in, you know, use ref. So okay, so at least now there's less options, I think, or at least I know how to use it a bit better. Okay, cool. So yeah, let's see if that continues to work. So then in our login component over here, we'll just go back to our file explorer so we can see where we're adding our files. And yes, we're going to go down to within here, and we want to create this use ref for our email. So we'll create another constant and we'll call this email input ref, and we will make this use ref like so, and then we'll have our password one as well. Cool. So now what we can do is add in that ref down below on our actual inputs. So we have a ref, and this is going to be our email ref, email input ref, and then a ref on our password input, and this is going to be our password input ref that we've just created. So we're just hooking it all up now. Yes, okay. So okay. So now we can check if our email or if our password is valid, then we can now refer to this particular component, so our input email, our email input component in particular, and if it is not valid, focus into that box. So that's what we've just set up now. So now we want to input so we want to actually use our email input ref dot current dot activate. So it's saying this particular input, and then activate, which is just our activate, which is just going to focus us into that box. And then we have another else, which is going to be if the password is not valid, then we want to focus into the password box. So password input ref dot current dot activate. Cool. Oh no. So Max has just continued on to say, like, once we save, this actually won't work. Which that was making a lot of sense to me. So yeah, he just said, like, this isn't going to work, basically. So we need to rethink this, and that's what we're about to do. So stay tuned. So yes. Okay, so function components cannot be given ref. So here where we've added the ref like this, which actually made sense to me, this can't be given a ref like this. So instead, how we actually make this work is we use another hook, which is called use imperative handle. And we do this in our input component. So here we're going to use imperative handle, which I like that. Cool. Okay, so rather than trying to control this from the parent, we want to control it imperatively. So that's why it's called the use imperative handle. And you rarely use this. This isn't used very often, but this is how we would use it. So the second parameter you pass, we'll add the first parameter now in a minute, is a function. So we'll just set that up. And then we want to return. So on focus, we want to activate. Or you could name it whatever you want. Activate. So then this name can be called outside. So that's why we can't access this activate name in here. So normally we just use our props. Props will be how this is normally done, but in this case we need to do it slightly differently. Okay, so now this is allowing us to actually pass in a ref on those inputs. So we can pass props and ref, and then down here we can use that ref and then we just need to send this back out by using React forward ref, which is how you would do this. And we pass that our component function. So this all needs to be passed in now. And we pass everything into that. So that's going to end all the way down here. Oh no, even past. So here, there we go, we send everything back. So let's reload, and we're defining use effect, but we are not using it. That's what that warning says there. So we'll just get rid of that. And then we will try and log in. Okay, so it's not valid. So our validation, something is up. So let's keep watching. Oh, say, okay. So yeah, rather than calling .activate in here, we need to now call .focus, because we couldn't actually do it with .activate. She was just trying to get our head around what was happening, but .focus is what we have called that function, and you need to do it with the use imperative handle instead. So that's what we're doing now, and the function that we're going to access is actually the focus function. So cool. And now what should happen is, if we reload the page, what should be happening, and I log out, if I try to log in with nothing in any of the fields, it should refocus me back into the email field if there's no email being passed in, and if there's no password, it should bring the cursor into the password field. But that doesn't seem to be working, so something is wrong with our validation, but that's okay because we're going to figure it out. So that's fine. So we will worry about that now in a moment. Sorry. So okay, so in our login, I just want to check what we're supposed to have in here, because this got very messy. So that's clearly where it's falling over. But first of all, I'm just going to get rid of some of this stuff. So we have our email reducer function. Okay, takes in a state and an action, and it's checking on the action type, user input or user blur, and it's doing something. And what it's doing is checking if it includes an @ symbol. Cool. Next, we have our password reducer, which I've called pass reducer, so that's okay too. I'm passing a state and an action if our action type is user pass input. So this could be one of the things. Am I definitely using this keyword? Am I definitely using this function name? Because I've named them differently than Max has. So let's keep looking. Then we have our login component, which is passing in props. And what props are we using? We have, these are gone, so I'll just get rid of them to clean this up. We have our form is valid, use state being tracked. Nah, it's alright. Then we have our email state and our dispatch email, our password state and our dispatch password. So that's okay. Then we have our so we don't actually have our auth context up where I am, but we'll just keep looking for a minute. So then he has a use effect that is just console logging or return, whereas ours is doing a little bit more, but that's okay. So all Max's one is doing is console logging, but I think he does have that other one down below. He has his auth context, and we just added these in, so they should be there. And so that's cool. Let's just check code use reducer. Right, so our login component, and then where are we? Use reducer and use effect. We've done that. Ooh, we're nearly finished this chapter. This is so awesome. Da da da. So source components, we want to go to our login component, login.js. This is the finished version of the file. I'm just going to split this to the left and check what I am missing out on. So there's our email reducer, there's our password reducer, cool. Here's our login. So that's also the old version, because I need my one. So here's my one. So we have our, so then we're down here with our login. So we have our form is valid, set form, email reduce state. He's called it email state, that's okay. Password reduce state, he has called it password state, that's okay. Then he has this use effect, which I don't even see what that's doing, so that's fine. That's not really doing anything, it's just console logging out things, which is fine. Then we have our is valid, email is valid and password is valid, email and password state. So I've called that email reduce state and password reduce state. So okay, there are initial states for our reducers. Yes, there are initial states. Okay, all looking good. Then we have our use effect here, where we have defined our identifier, which is our set timeout. We're checking if the form is valid. We're passing in our email reduce state. Okay, so I've passed the wrong thing into my use effect, as you can see here. So if we have a look at this use effect function that both myself and Max have defined, and we're just declaring a constant identifier and setting a timeout so that it does something on a timeout with this effect. And what it's going to do, first of all, is console log out something and then set the form as valid. And in set form is valid, what we're passing in here is our email is valid and our password is valid. But what I've passed in is our email reduce state dot is valid, which is the same thing as this actually, or else our password state dot is valid, which is the same thing as this, because it's just accessing this value. So this is the key, this is the value, and this is how. So they should actually be the same. I've just named them slightly differently. So I want to pass in my, let's just do it the same way Max has and do email is valid. But let's just show you how that's actually the same thing, right? So what I've done here is got the pass reduce state, which is the name of this object, which is just a key value pair. So pass reduce state has a property called is valid. And the way you would access the property within the pass reduce state is by dot notation. And this is the key value. So the key and the value of this object. So in order to access the is valid, what the is valid property is holding, which in this case is this password is valid switch, is it valid or not? This will tell us yes or no, it's a boolean. So in order to access this, within this object, the value, you type in the name and then dot the property. So here we have pass reduce say dot is valid, which is the exact same as actually just passing this thing in. So we'll just do it the way Max did it, and pass this in because it's cleaner as well. So we'll do that, and then we'll just keep on checking out where, if I have any mad stuff that shouldn't be in there. So then he has email is valid and password is valid. Why was I getting errors that I needed all this? Oh, because I passed it in differently. So now we can get rid of these because we are no longer using the whole object. We're just using these two things which we have passed in here, and we've called down here that we need them, so that's okay. So we can get rid of saying that our dependency is the greater object, because we're no longer using the greater object, we're using a property of that object which we have passed in. And we've also declared in our dependencies to say we're going to pass it into use effect, so that's okay. And then we come down to our email change handler, user input, cool. And then for the password, yes, I have used the correct type here, so that should be okay. Let's just see what's down here. Pass reduce state is valid. So I'm not checking correctly here, I don't think. So what Max is doing is, on our email change handler, he's using the dispatch email, and we have our type of user input, and what we want our value to be is our event.target value, so that's actually okay. And then we have this bit commented out, so I will just comment this part out, because maybe we're checking for the validation of our email in the wrong place. You know, we've done it somewhere else now. So then in our password change handler, it's going to be the same story, isn't it? Yeah. So we will just comment this out. And then in our, so this is where we're going to do it instead. In our validate email handler, we want to check when it's blurred. So this can remain, which makes sense. So dispatch pass, and that is what we call that up here, so that's okay. They should be linking together. And now if I save and reload, I was just trying to do validation in 2 different places, I think. So let's not type in any password, any email. Let's give a password. And we still get logged in. So there's still something wrong, but that's okay. We will figure that out, what's wrong and how we're going to log in properly. We're just missing something very small. So that's all good in the hood. We will continue with this tomorrow. Happy Sunday. I'm going to go and cook myself some lunch because it's 2:30. So I'm going to go and make myself some food and just, you know, get on with my Sunday. Got things to do, and enjoy everybody your Sunday, or on whatever day you're watching this. Enjoy your day and have a lovely time. And thank you so much for joining me, Lilly Code, on my channel for coding, and where we code and learn together. I really appreciate it. So have a lovely day. Bye.